Thought you'd like it.
I would. Now, the reality is that 81% of people want to write a book, and only 15% have actually started. So I want to know, why is this number so low?
Yeah. Well, I think it's fascinating to think of why the number's so high as well. So 81% actually want to write a book. I think that is part of the question. But the reason why it's so low is because, well, there's a few reasons. One is because there are a lot of charlatans out there. Am I allowed to say that? Okay.
Absolutely. We're going to call them out.
We call them out, but there are a lot of people out there who maybe they have written a book and therefore they think, I did it this way, so therefore that is the way. So that kind of gets people confused, to be honest, because it seems like, well, that person said this way and this person said this way. Is there a way? So I think that's part of it. So why 15% don't get started. So only 15% get started. The other reason I think is because unless you see writing a book as a business asset and you know what you're going to do with it from a business point of view or a career point of view, then it just gets added onto an incredibly long list of jobs to get done and tasks to do, and it never gets to the top of that list. It kind of always is, it's on there somewhere, nagging at the back of your head, making you feel uncomfortable, making you feel like you've let yourself down, but it never gets to the top of the list because you don't have a business job for your book to do. And as soon as that switch over, business job for the book to do, people get started because they can see the outcome, they can see the asset that it will become. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I remember when I started writing my first book many years ago. I started in 2008. In 2009, It didn't happen. In 2010, it didn't happen. In 2012, it didn't happen, and my wife starts questioning me. 2013, I start to do it. But the book kind of wrote itself. And I know there's many different ways to write a book. There's no good or bad, right or wrong. There's just different. And my books came about by doing webinars, because what I found was when I grew up, I had a lot of learning disabilities. So the bullshit stories started to go around in my head. Well, you were never good at English. Nothing that you said made sense anyway. So if you wrote something, why would that make sense?
Yeah.
And who are you and what experience do you have to write this book? And I remember there was a lot of external constraints and internal constraints. But once I got to that stage, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my books. I knew I didn't want to be a published author. I knew I didn't want to be an Amazon bestseller. I didn't want to be a New York Times bestseller. All I wanted to do was put a short book in the hands of my customers so they could read it and say, I want to speak to Daniel.
Yes.
And so as a published author, in the first couple of years of publishing my own books and getting them out, I made $100,000 off them.
Yeah.
So I was very clear on my intent.
Yes.
But not everybody has the same intent as me, and I'd love to explore that. In your experience, what are the different intents for writing a book?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you did a really smart thing, because that gap between 2008 and 2013, when you got told off by your wife, that gap gave you that chance to actually macerate the idea and get it even better. So you had that thinking chance. And I think one of the problems is people dive straight into writing a book without going through the thinking phase. So that's one of the first things. But the intentions for the book, you've got a brilliant intention, and it's my favourite, which is that making it so that a potential client only wants to speak to you because they understand your concept, they understand the big idea, they understand the value that you can produce, they understand the transformation that they'll get if they speak to you. So I think that's one of my favourite ideas. But there are there are quite a few different ways you can use your book. And I think of it as a job to be done. I don't like the word funnels very much because I don't want to be funneled. But if you think of a sales flow of like capturing attention of people at the beginning, your book could work there. That could be its job. If you think of the next stage in that flow of getting information about the people who might be interested in you, I call that prospecting, and they kind of said, oh, hey, I'm interested in you, then your book could work there. So you could actually turn suspects guessing into prospects. They put their hand up and said they're interested and interesting. Your book could actually, you could sell your book, and I've got lots of clients who do use their book as a sale. You know, they sell their book and they make money from selling their book, but it's just one tiny thing to do. And you could sell your book one-to-one, one-to-many. You could give your book strategically free. You could use your book, one of my favourite ways is hyper-personalised. Maybe we talk about that. Or you could use your book for referrals, which is like the fourth step in my little process, which is one of the best ways for other people to recommend you is they can say, hey, read his book. You know, read her book. She's written a great book on this subject. Go and read the book. And it's the easiest referral and recommendation because it comes with lots of authority, and it's kind of a normal way to recommend somebody. It feels comfortable and easy. So your book can have any of those jobs, and it can also have other jobs. I mean, it can, you know, but start there. What's the intention? What's the job your book is going to do for your business? And obviously, the part of writing it is also what's your job the book is going to do for the reader. But if you're thinking about you and your intentions for your book and why you're writing it, start with those 4 steps.
Well, I love that word, the job to be done.
Yeah,
because
it's a great
I
phrase.
was clear on that. The job of this book is to get an appointment. It's not to be an Amazon bestseller. It's not to be a New York Times bestseller. It's just to give it to one person and get an appointment. And I remember it did it very, very well. Plus, it was low barrier to entry. It was the cost of printing it and a little bit of time. I remember one of my clients, and I'm going to introduce you to him. He's also an author. And I remember the first time I met him was around about 2018. A networking event, one of the members there introduced me to him, and I went to his office and I met him in the foyer, and we sat down and had a coffee, and I took along my Louis Vuitton bag. And when I met him, I shook his hand, said hello, reached inside and handed to him a copy of my book, which I'd already personally signed to him. And he looked at me, and the first thing I thought he was going to stab me because he kind of looked a little bit bewildered. And then he looked at the book and he was in shock. And he didn't know what to do with the book. Now, one of the things that I know about a book is it's very hard to throw away a book. I can throw away your business card, but I can't throw away your book. There's a sense of guilt about it. You put it on the table, you put it on the shelf. Even if you haven't read it, you put it back on the table, then you put it back on the shelf, and then you get guilt and you say, I'm going to read this. And I gave him the book. And after we met, he called me back and he said, I've never had somebody personally sign a book and give it to me. Now, it's 2003. He's been a customer since 2018.
Yeah.
One book, one appointment, one customer. And he didn't care that it wasn't a New York Times bestseller. He didn't care it wasn't an Amazon bestseller. He didn't care that it was self-published. It spoke to him about his problem. And whilst he was going through the pages, he was having a conversation with me, a long-form conversation. And that was my intent.
Yeah. That's just beautiful. And I love that intent. And there's there is so, you can even amplify that. So I had a client that came, the first book I wrote was 20 years ago, first business book I wrote was 20 years ago. And I had a client that came to me 5 years ago who'd been trying to write her book for 10 years. And she came to me not because of the books I was writing now, but the book I wrote 20 years ago. She said, I read your book 20 years ago and I've had it on my desk ever since. And there were things in there that really made sense to me. And so as soon as I decided I was going to do my book, you're the only person I thought of. So you're so right about people just don't throw books away. They sit on their desk. They're bloody awkward as well, aren't they? You can't hide them. Yeah. Yeah. They take up space. They're actually this is one of the beautiful things about books, printed books in particular, is they actually take up a physical space in the world. And with our world going so electronic and digital and remote and zoomy, something that takes up a physical space in the world changes people's perception of you, and it's a great reminder.
No, I do love podcasts, and I love the thought of our voices being inside other people's ears, and they can be a fly on the wall in the conversation. However, with the book, you cannot multitask. You can't ride your bike, you can't cook the dinner, you can't put the kids to bed. You might be able to have a nice bath, but you don't want to get the book wet. When you read, you can only do one thing. And that's what I love about the book, is its full engagement and you're capturing their full attention.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was people want to hear from you. Many years ago, I owned a franchise business, and the franchise had great information and the person was very well respected. But my customers kept saying, Daniel, we want to hear it from you. We've heard it from the other person, but we want it from you. And when I gave them my books, they were even more blown away. They said, that's what we want. We want it based on how you see it. And I think they're a beautiful tool to have in business. I also think they're a tool to help you amplify your influence and also to be able to catapult your impact. And this is a lot of things I hear from my customers. They're saying, Daniel, I want to be more influential. Daniel, I want to have a bigger impact. How do I do it? And I say to them, write a book.
Yeah.
So the book can improve your credibility. So what are you seeing? Once your customers write a book, once you've written your book, what's changed about your level of credibility in the marketplace?
Yeah, it's actually fascinating because, and so I say that I'm the only book coach who advises people not to write a book. Okay, so I'm the only one that does this because I think sometimes a book is not the right thing, but when it is the right thing, you know it's the right thing, and you do the right book, and you use the book intentionally to get that impact, to get the influence, to get the income, then a book is so powerful. It's just it's an atomic, it's a physical, it's atomic, it's unthrowawayable, and the impact that people get from having a book and the credibility that creates. Still, even today when the barrier to entry is really being lowered to getting published, 20 years ago when I started, barrier to entry was still really quite high. You had to be published, or you had to have a team around you that could do the publishing. And these days, pretty much anybody can get published, which is great, and a problem for credibility, in my opinion. So I think we're hitting this credibility crisis right now, where because the barrier to entry to most channels has reduced, it means that more people are coming and accessing those channels. And so you have to, when you're writing your book, when you're creating your creation, your podcast, whatever it is that you're doing, you have to think about how your idea is disrupting what's going on. You have to be different. You can't be an also ran or an also book or an also podcast. You've got to be different. You've got to disrupt somehow. And if your book does disrupt an industry or an idea or pauses people, then you're going to improve and increase your influence and your impact and your income. I think without that element of disruption, then your investment in the process of writing a book may not pull off the income that you're looking for or the return that you're looking for. So I think you need to start with some element of disruption. That's to get that impact.
That element of disruption, do we have to be 1,000% different? Do we have to be 500% different? Do we have to be 100% different? Or do we just have to be 10 or 20% different to what's already happening? What is that percentage to disrupt a train of thought or an industry?
Do you know, sometimes it can just be a word. It can be that simple, or a rephrasing of something that people take for granted. I'm an engineer by background, just a silly story, but I'm an engineer by background. And and one of the things we used to talk about as engineers and manufacturing was total quality management. And the word quality ended up making zeros. It had no impact. Everybody talked about total quality management, quality, and the word quality stopped having an impact. So if you can take a word that people are throwing around, or an idea that people are throwing around, and you can make them think about that differently, then even that, and that's just like one flip, that could be like a 1% change, that is good enough to go forward with an idea for a book. But just like, for example, I don't know how to make a website as a book. You know, there's like a billion websites, how to make a website books. And what you're really looking for is disrupt the swipe, yeah, I've seen that, yeah, I understand that, yeah, I agree with that. You actually want to get a bit edgy, a bit challenging.
When I was working with Emirates Airline, they were disruptive. And they only did things a little bit different. So being Australian, Australians want to get on a Qantas flight. And they say, well, I can have a pork sausage or a pork chop on Qantas. Well, they flew a Muslim airline. They said, we can't have pork chops or pork sausages, so we're not going to fly Emirates. That's a Muslim airline. And so Emirates said, well, there's a bottomless cup. You can drink as much alcohol as you want. We're going to fly Emirates. Qantas had alcohol, but endless, unlimited alcohol. For the mind of the Australian, they were blown away. Oh my gosh, we love the Muslim airline. Now we're going to fly them all around the world. And that was one little thing. And then the other airlines caught up, and then they just improved their in-flight entertainment. We're going to give you in-flight entertainment, but instead of giving you 100 channels, we're going to give you 1,000. And that disrupted the industry. Same thing, just a little bit more. Doesn't weigh the aircraft down with a couple of extra TV shows. And that's what I learned when I wrote my book. At the start, in those first few years, I thought I had to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
And then somebody said to me, Daniel, all you've got to do is just got to put a little bit of chrome plating on the wheel. Just make it a little bit shinier.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah.
And then it happened.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's a really interesting idea of the chrome plating, because, like, you know, the difference between a Ferrari and a Mini, you know, they both get you from A to B. They can get you there probably, you know, pretty fast. Minis are pretty cool these days. But you will pay more attention to the shiny Ferrari, the chrome plating, and so it that disrupts, that kind of gets attention, and you need to be, I call it the difference that makes the difference. So it doesn't have to be everything different, but you have to have a difference that makes a difference. And something about you, about your book, about your thought leadership, about the things you share, has to have a bit of an attitude. You have to be brave to have that attitude and just kind of like get it out there. And I think that just tiny bit element of disruption is what is going to set us apart in the future, especially, and I'm trying not to disrail this, but especially in the world of AI, and people are writing a book in a weekend and they're using their bots to write it. That, well, you know, that's not going to disrupt the world, but you could, you know, with your one change of thinking about things and your one way of explaining things, so that other people just get that transformation too.
Well, I know what it does disrupt. When they do it on ChatGPT and they write a book, it disrupts their self-esteem, and they end up feeling like an imposter.
Yeah.
Because
it is exactly the opposite of what we're looking for. Yeah.
They didn't do the work.